So can we be as clever as a sperm whale using gizmos and gadgets? And this is just going to be strictly the decoy talk today. So these are our field trials. I'm going to go, I know we're short of time, so I'm not going to depth about each of the trials that we did, but I'm going to just give you an overview of why we think this holds promise and what its weaknesses are. So the goal here is to reduce sperm whale depredation with our fleet. So this is somewhat of an outlandish schematic of a long line. Is over the Gulf of Alaska. The ganyons and hooks are not that long by a long shot, but they're about sometimes a couple of miles long. Fishermen set them all different lengths. Hook spacing is variable. Ganyon length is variable. Some of them use snaps, some of them use fixed, some of them use auto baiters. But this project itself is just strictly about looking at using a decoy. That engine cycling that I talked about earlier is what we put in the decoy to try to lure the whales away from the real long line. So where are we here? Oh, so this is luring them. So again, this is a spread of the depredated fish. It's reported since the 70s, and here's our sea swap project. Again, recorders are put on the long line, 2 on each end of the long line and on the decoy. Two on the decoy, so you can get range and bearing for the direction of the whale, where the whale's coming from, and when it leaves and if it returns. And so we can tell when it leaves, if it leaves the decoy, and when if it goes towards the long line with the recorders on the each end of the set. So when the long line fishing vessels haul their gear, and they shift it in and out of gear, and right when they come up from the bottom, so that's when the cavitation begins, and that's the lure and the cue for the whales. And it can be heard at great distances, and so there you can see the cavitation, and that's actually a real propeller cavitation from the vessels. So our thought here was, can we really deter or use a decoy to keep these whales away from the real gear? So what the fisherman does is that he goes out to set his gear. He puts the decoy in first, some distance away from the gear, and we did some trials of various distances. And then he goes and sets his gear, and then he gets out of dodge. He goes away, and he doesn't turn it on till the morning when he comes out to haul, and it's remotely operated. So this is what the decoy looks like. It's big and heavy. It's really clunky. It's not user-friendly. The fishermen absolutely hated it. It had this huge flagpole. It was in pain to haul around. It was a pain to lift. The blue are the speakers, and this is the way it's set. You can see in the schematic here, the schematic here, that's that one on the left here, your left is the decoy, the sperm whale's there, and then the one on the right is the one with the actual fishing gear, the true gear. So we asked the fishermen to do these test trials for us and set it 1 to 10 nautical miles away from their true fishing set. So right after the soak, the vessel moved away as far as it could. Usually we told them to go up in the shallow area. So we did this test in the summer of 2013 with basically one fisherman. And out of 28 deployments, we got 14 usable sets. They were determined to be usable if the decoy was activated correctly and it broadcast during a haul, and the sperm whales were acoustically detected either at the decoy or at the true fishing haul. So the first thing we did with these trials was we went through acoustic data, and we made spectrograms, and this plot actually shows 10 minutes between 10:20 here. I can do this right here, 10:20 here. The whales were acoustically active. The decoy was turned on right there. And these are some other plots from recorders on the fishing gear. And basically there's minimal to no whale activity. And here's some other plots here from recorders on the fishing gear. And the top plot, the top plot here, it shows a summary of the 14 usable sets we analyzed. I won't go into the details. So if you want to know more about each of these plots, I can go into it in depth. This is just a summary of the 14 usable sets. So you can see on 4 of these sets, whales were detected acoustically right here at the decoy only. Were never sighted acoustically at the fishing hole. And our first statistical analysis for this looked at the number of whales that arrived at the fishing hole. And we fit some statistical data, some regressions, and plotted the points against matched the data. So, and it was statistically significant that the whales did stay at the decoy, or they went to the hull, and it depended on how far away the decoy was away from the fishing vessel. And that's the key, is the whales basically did math in their heads. If the decoy was close enough, say between 1 to 3 nautical miles, the whales would take a chance and go check out when they heard the reel fishing gear engine go into cycling, and it would leave the decoy and go visit the real longline gear. But if it was far enough away, beyond 5 or 6 nautical miles, the whale would stay at the decoy. So there's some line there, and it really depends on some of the ocean conditions what the whale did. But it was consistent, and it was statistically significant, although the sample size was relatively small, and we probably should test it over. But it really does hold the most promise for us to date. And we are, because we can show it statistically, and it can be repeatable, and I think that's the key. We need to have repeatable experiments so we can show that over time, it just wasn't happenstance, it just wasn't random, and over time that there was some success. But there are a couple caveats with this. If there are other vessels in the area, it's probably not going to work very well because you get confounded, especially if they're fishing fairly close. And the biggest thing, as the fishermen pointed out to us, is if there are no whales in your vicinity at all, why would you set gear and have 2 engine cyclings to lure them to where you're fishing? So if you have whales in the area, and no other vessels, is really the best time to use it. So it's one of those circumstances. It's one of those tools a fisherman can have in his toolbox, and if it works and the circumstances are right, it wouldn't hurt to set a gear, especially if you could set a distance away. If we could really get that distance down where the whale would stay at the decoy and not come over to the vessel. So that's the decoy. I wish I could bring the decoy. It's about 14. It's really a pain, I have to say. It's big and heavy, and it was a pain to deploy, a pain to retrieve. And if the 2 guys that just came before me, if you can think of a way to build a really good fisherman-friendly decoy that would be easy to retrieve and easy to deploy, it would be a good thing to test. So, and discussion time. Thanks.